Let's switch gears a bit. And you're often interviewed about the stock market, and that's your investments is your area of expertise. I've always been fascinated about the Philippine stock market because it's one of the oldest in Asia,
Yes.
and yet it's also I think the least performing stock market in Asia. And correct me if my figures are wrong, but I heard that only 1% of 1% of Filipinos actually have investments in the stock market, and yet in other countries this is not the case. You mentioned Singapore, for instance. I guess the first question is how do we encourage more Filipinos to put away money and save rather than spending it?
Yeah, no, you're right, Klink. I think now it's increased, but even if it's a 1.5 million
still,
people with stock with PSE accounts compared to 105 million, it's still extremely small, right?
Yeah.
But I guess before we can run, we have to walk, but that's why I also agree with what the BSP is doing by improving the financial literacy.
Okay.
Right? So in a way, stock market, if you don't know what you're doing, parang sugal rin yan. But in a way, wag na lang kayo mag-isabong o wag na lang kayo mag-tongits.
Magweting.
Mag-ano lang kayo, mag-invest na lang kayo sa stock market. At least it's a legitimate way and will guide you. But you're right, the stock market is a very key barometer, right? Sometimes it's not the only barometer anyway, because the economy, the underground economy in the Philippines is doing much better sometimes than the stock market. Stock market, I think, is only improved less than 1% year to date. But in reality, the economy is growing. It's maybe still easily 5%, diba?
Right.
So, but it's still a good sign sana that the stock market will do better. So we need more companies to list. That's working with President Mon Monzon and his people are well refined. We want to get more listings. We're working with the board, encouraging them. But it's really very challenging also. And we want people to invest more because I think there was somebody who said that there are more crypto accounts for Filipinos than there are for the stock market. But so it's really an education process. We want them to invest sana because it's also good. You can help these companies grow and hopefully you'll also get good dividends.
Right. But how do we I suppose popularize the stock market? Because I was and this was a couple of decades ago. Maybe tell me if things have changed. But I was surprised that they had some businessmen who was visiting the Philippine Stock Exchange. This was their old office in Makati. And this person was, I think, from Cebu or outside of Metro Manila. And I think the impression was the stock market was only for companies in Metro Manila and big conglomerates, not for entrepreneurs like himself. Do you get that sense that there is this perception among Filipinos that the stock market is only for the biggest Philippine companies?
Hopefully no naman. Admittedly, the foreign investors will only invest in the biggest Filipino companies. Usually, you have to have at least a 10 billion market capitalization or total value for them to look at you. But in fairness to the PSE and the board, they really are trying to encourage even the SMEs. There's an SME board. So even if your company is making 10 million, 20 million pesos, you can list. So it's more not the size but more the story. If it's a good growth prospect, let's say you have a growing food company and you're franchising and then it's a good name already, that's exciting, or a good service will be excited. I'm hopefully pitching to some companies who are like that. Good growth stories, they've been resilient even during the pandemic and then they've reinvented themselves. The question lang if will they hit the market. The PSE also came out with this new sponsor model. So even if you're not, imagine if you're still starting up, but parang kumbaga you have a godfather helping you.
I see.
You can list based on that. It's very close to the SPACs of the US. There was this sponsor model. So it's something similar. Nobody has done it yet, but we're encouraging them. So we want more people to invest. We're working with the BSP, the BAP, for people to at least learn to invest more. Maybe in a way it coincides also with reducing inflation rather than buy a new phone.
Right.
In a way, of course, this youth like the experience, they will travel.
Invest it,
save it.
You mentioned financial literacy a while ago, and the government now is looking at K-12, and is there room, you think, for maybe financial literacy to be taught in schools, and how young should that be introduced? At what age? Because I hear stories, and I don't know if they're true, but maybe in Singapore, grade school students, they have, I guess, extra allowance. They use their gadgets to monitor the investments.
Right.
But is that something that you think that's possible here?
I think from inserting it in the education is very possible.
Okay.
Even when Francis Lim, our famous lawyer,
Yes,
was with the PSE
former
president, right? Yeah. He already had an idea of which college subjects to insert for capital markets. Right. So that should be easy. It's just inserting a few units, maybe 3-6 units, and that's enough to get them.
Right.
The key is high school or even grade school. It doesn't even have to be investing, but it's more just in basic, at least, savings.
Right.
Those should be taught earlier on. That way, at least, they just have to be more financially responsible. They don't have to know how to invest, but at least they know how to save money, right? Not to overspend.
Right.
I think that can be taught at an early age, because ideally, our parents should be teaching us, but maybe because sometimes the parents are so busy having double jobs, or your parent is an OFW, you're not here, nobody does that. If those can be inserted in the earlier curriculum, I think it will help.
Yeah, but does it worry you that sometimes people view investing, in a similar way as we might view gambling? You mentioned cryptocurrencies a while ago. That there seems to be this I suppose desire, right, to hit it big right away. Whereas really investing is a sort of like running a marathon, right? I mean, they seem to want to run the sprint and then cash in right away. How can it be done? What do what can we do?
No, it's a good point. In a way, until this last year or so, right, it was also hard for them to convince them to invest because interest rates were so low.
Right.
If you could only make 1 or 2% on a savings account, there's really no incentive. The youth will just spend it. But now that these interest rates are going to 5% and you can get bonds at 6 or 7%, at least we should do our part and encourage them to save more rather than to spend it on experience, right? And the other thing also, I guess it's this new generation. It's just how they are, right? And we have to respect that.
Right.
I'm sorry, but I guess I am the older generation where we save and then we save for the future.
Yeah.
They're not like that anymore.
Right.
So we have to accept that also. So
they're living for the moment.
Correct, living for the moment. Carpe diem, but then they don't save to buy a house. They don't save to buy a car.
Right.
In our case, we were saving already for these things for the future.
Right.
So that's the difference also.
But going back to the stock market. How do we get rid of, or how do we address that intimidation factor? Because do you still get that sense that for ordinary investors, they find investing in the stock market a bit too complicated, or too intimidating, and yet this is the crazy part, as you said. They go into cryptocurrencies, which is, I think, much more volatile, much more complicated, but they jump into it as if they're blind, right?
Correct. No, so I think we just have to be more patient, but working with the PSE and even BDO and the other companies, the other securities brokers, we've launched online retail brokering, right? And it's grown, I think, 30 or 40% annually, fastest growing segment. Admittedly, that's why before we're less than 1 million stockholder PSE investors. Now we're almost maybe close to 2, and the growth has been really the retail side.
Okay.
So we just have to continue doing that because it takes a lot of time also. But we're holding the hands of these first-time investors, so that way they learn to get their feet wet, and hopefully they won't get burned.
Right.
But at least they know the value. We make it easy, and then they're already online investing. There are lots of these apps where you can check. So instead of doing isabong, you just play with your phone and buy a BDO or buy an SM or Ayala stock. Correct.
Is there something being done to encourage more companies to list? I know that sometimes it was a stumbling block, not just the compliance factor, right? But the taxes, the stamp. There are so many taxes and fees sometimes that goes into listing that is not experienced for delisted companies or unlisted companies.
True.
Is there reform? Are there reforms needed there? I mean, to make it easier for companies to look at, maybe possibly listing.
No, the big expense that was reduced because of the CREATE law was the IPO tax.
Okay.
That was from 2 to 4%.
Okay.
That's already gone, at least.
Okay.
So now that already reduces your cost of an IPO almost half.
Okay.
So from a cost perspective, it's not that expensive anymore. We just have to convince now these other companies, whether SMEs and the large hit gems of
Sure.
companies, except they just don't want to open their kimono, that there are benefits, right? Maybe because, the stock market hasn't done so well these last, 2-3 years. But once the stock market improves, people will get excited. Hopefully, that will be a way for them to list again. Because there are many benefits anyway, Clint, especially even inheritance planning, professionalizing the company, because sometimes most of the clients I'm talking to now, the founders don't have children who want to get involved.
Sure.
They're doing other things. So they sayang naman, so that by listing it, they can continue the legacies that they built. Yeah.
Right. And what about the processes, the paperwork? Has that become easier? I mean, is the compliance a legitimate concern?
It's a legitimate concern. It hasn't been reduced.
Okay.
But frankly naman, we even guide them. We can tell them, these are the lawyers you will have to find.
Right.
These are the reports. There's a lot of reporting, but it's well worth it. Because anyway, the governance or the seal of good housekeeping, once you're listed, elevates you already.
Okay.
And then it helps you with suppliers. It helps
Right.
you with creditors. You're seen as already, leveled up. And so there are benefits. Yes, there's more reporting, there's more compliance, but it's not naman unmanageable.
Right. And we're talking about cryptocurrency as sort of gambling with your investments. there was a time when sometimes there was a gulf between how the performance of the stock market and what the real economy was doing.
Yes, right.
Suggesting that maybe the stock markets have really focused on a certain sector in the high tech, but not really the real economy.
Yes.
Is that happening here in the Philippines, or what's your sense?
No, sometimes there's still that perception, and maybe you're right, it's true, because especially if we're only weighted towards the large conglomerates, right?
Right.
In a way, it's also representative of the country, because in fairness, the rich get richer, right? And in this social pyramid, but some of the poor are really still hard up, and their lives have not improved. So in a way, the stock market investors and the issuers are the cream of the crop. So we have to reach the bottom.
Right.
So you're right, we have to democratize it further. From the investing side, the PSE has done steps to make it easier to learn to invest anyway. But if you really have no money, it's hard. Then you don't even have the 3,000 or 5,000 pesos to invest, because you can invest for as low as that now.
For that amount,
for the stock market. Yeah.
Well,
so that's the real economy, and sometimes I'm hoping naman now that the government, with this improvement in the GDP, and because of financial literacy, it goes down to the grassroots. Diba?
Right. So, in other words, we don't have to buy a new iPhone every time a new one comes out, right?
Correct. My iPhone is a 4-year-old model.
Well, it's always been a pleasure to talk to you, and I really appreciate you making time. But before I go, maybe you'd like to leave our audience with a message?
Sure. Thank you, Klink. No, all I have to say is that I'm still a very good believer in the Philippines.
Okay.
A lot of my contemporaries have come back home also, the brain drain. I believe in that also with our OFWs. If we just create jobs for them, they will come home rather than work abroad. In a way, I was an OFW. I was working in the financial sector
You were
abroad.
in New York?
Yeah, New York and Hong Kong. But I love the Philippines. The Philippines has a lot of potential. We just all have to work together, diba? And this government is trying its best. So we as citizens should just also try and hope for the best. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Well said. Well, thank you again very much. I'd like to thank also our viewers watching this program today live. Those watching the replay, thank you also. And I'd like to thank Pastor Apollo Kibuloy for making this program possible. This has been Business and Politics. I'll see you next week.